The first time I saw the service truck, it was parked behind me at a rest area. The second time, it was parked outside my delivery warehouse. The third time, the driver was sitting in my truck. That was the moment I stopped telling myself it was a coincidence. I was driving a refrigerated trailer through southern Illinois on an overnight run. I had picked up a load of frozen food earlier that evening and was heading toward a distribution center about 3 hours away. It was a normal route, mostly interstate. A few long stretches with almost nothing around them. I stopped at a rest area a little after midnight because I needed coffee and a bathroom. There were probably 10 trucks in the lot. I parked near the middle, shut off the engine, and went inside. When I came back out, I noticed a white service truck parked behind mine. It had a small amber light bar on top and some kind of equipment rack in the bed. No company name, no phone number. Just a faded blue sticker on the driver's door that I couldn't read from a distance. I didn't think much of it. I climbed into my cab and started the engine. As I pulled away, the service truck followed. I assumed the driver was leaving too. I stayed on the highway. The service truck stayed behind me for almost 20 miles. Then I took an exit to get fuel. The service truck took the same exit. I pulled into a gas station. It continued past me. I watched it disappear down the road. That was it. At least, that's what I thought. I fueled up, checked the trailer, and got back on the highway. About an hour later, I stopped again. This time, I parked at a larger truck stop. I went inside for coffee. When I came back, the service truck was there. It was parked 3 spaces away from mine. I actually laughed to myself. There were hundreds of vehicles on that highway. It was probably nothing. I looked at the driver. He was sitting inside the cab. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't eating. He was looking directly at me. I started my truck. He didn't move. I pulled out. He stayed. That made me feel better. I got back on the highway. For the next 2 hours, I didn't see him. I reached my delivery warehouse around 4 in the morning. The facility was huge and well lit. There were several trucks waiting at the entrance. I checked in, got a dock assignment, and backed into the door. While I was waiting for the warehouse employee to bring me the paperwork, I looked through my mirror. The service truck was parked across the street. I stared at it. There was no reason for it to be there. This wasn't a public parking area. It was an industrial road beside the warehouse. The truck was parked behind a row of dumpsters. I took a picture. Then I called the security office. I asked if they knew what company the service truck belonged to. The guard said no. I described it. He said, "Don't worry about it. We've had utility contractors working around here." That made sense. I went inside. About 20 minutes later, I returned to my truck. The driver's door was locked. I climbed in. Something felt wrong. I couldn't immediately tell what. Then I noticed the passenger seat. There was a bottle of water sitting on it. I hadn't put it there. I stared at it. The cap was missing. I checked the cab. Nothing else looked disturbed. My wallet was still in the same place. My phone was still charging. My keys were in my pocket. I called the security office. The guard came outside. I told him someone had been inside my truck. He looked at the bottle. Then he checked the door. There were no signs of forced entry. He asked if I'd left the truck unlocked. I said no. He asked if anyone else had the keys. I said no. He looked uncomfortable. "Maybe you forgot." I didn't. He didn't argue. He told me to park near the security building until my delivery was finished. I moved the truck. Before leaving, I checked underneath the cab. Nothing. I checked the trailer doors. The seal was intact. Everything seemed normal. I unloaded. When I finished, I climbed back into the cab. The water bottle was gone. I hadn't touched it. I called the guard. He said nobody had entered the truck. I asked to see the security footage. He told me there was no camera covering that parking area. I left. The service truck was gone. I drove for about an hour before stopping at a fuel station. I checked the cab again. Nothing. Then I found something underneath the driver's seat. A small black plastic case. I opened it. Inside was a key. Not a truck key. A small metal key with a number stamped on it. I had no idea what it opened. I called my company. They told me to throw it away. I didn't. I put it in a plastic bag. That night, I stayed at a different truck stop. I parked under a bright light between two other trucks. I locked everything. I slept. At around 3 in the morning, someone knocked on my window. I woke up instantly. A man stood outside. Dark jacket. Baseball cap. He was holding a flashlight. I couldn't see his face clearly. He pointed toward the trailer. I stayed inside. He knocked again. Then he held up a piece of paper. I didn't open the window. He placed the paper against the glass. I could read 2 words. Wrong truck. He walked away. I watched him disappear between the parked trailers. I called the police. An officer arrived about 15 minutes later. We searched the area. The man was gone. There was no service truck. The officer took the paper. He asked me whether I'd seen the man before. I described him. Then I showed him the key. He looked at it. "Where did you find this?" "Under my seat." He asked whether I'd touched it. I said yes. He put it in an evidence bag. Then he asked me to check my truck again. We found something underneath the trailer. A small magnetic box attached to the frame. Inside was a tracking device. The officer looked at me. "Have you had this truck for long?" "About 6 months. Has anyone else driven it?" "Not that I know of." He removed the device. Then he asked me where I'd picked up my last 3 loads. I gave him the locations. He wrote everything down. He told me not to drive until they had checked the vehicle. The next morning, detectives came to the truck. They found 2 more devices. One was under the trailer. The other was inside a small access panel near the sleeper. That one bothered me. You couldn't see it unless you knew exactly where to look. The detectives asked my company for maintenance records. They discovered something strange. The truck had been taken to a repair shop 3 weeks earlier. The shop was legitimate. But one of the mechanics had been fired afterward. The reason wasn't theft. He had been caught accessing customer vehicles without authorization. The detective asked if I'd noticed anything missing. I hadn't. Then they checked my electronic logs. Someone had been tracking my routes for months, not just mine. Several drivers had the same devices installed. The police believed someone was using the information to identify trucks carrying valuable cargo. They weren't necessarily stealing the trucks. They were following them, learning where drivers stopped, where they slept, which routes they used, which warehouses they visited. The service truck was probably being used because it looked legitimate. A utility vehicle could sit beside a truck without attracting much attention. The detectives eventually identified the company behind it. It wasn't a real utility company. The vehicle had been purchased through a shell business. 2 men were arrested. One had previously worked at a trucking repair facility. The other had worked as a security contractor. They had been collecting driver information and selling it to cargo thieves. I thought that explained the service truck. Then the detective showed me something. A photograph. It was taken from a security camera at the warehouse. It showed my truck parked at the dock. The service truck was across the street, but the photograph had been taken almost 20 minutes before I arrived. That meant whoever was driving it knew my truck was coming. I asked how. The detective said they were still investigating. Then he asked me about the water bottle. I told him. They checked the warehouse cameras. Nobody approached my truck during the period when I was inside. Not the service truck. Not an employee. Nobody. I asked how the bottle got inside. The detective didn't know. He said the cab could have been entered earlier. I thought about that. Then I remembered something. The night before I left on the trip, I had taken the truck to a maintenance shop. The same shop that had fired the mechanic. I told the detective. He went quiet. "Did you sleep in the truck that night?" "No." "Was the truck locked?" "I think so. That was the first time I realized the person who entered my truck may not have been trying to steal anything. They may have been checking whether I noticed them. The bottle. The key. The note. The messages. They were all meant to make me aware." I asked the detective why. He said sometimes people wanted drivers to know they were being watched because fear made people easier to control. That explanation stayed with me. The arrests happened a few weeks later. I changed trucks. I changed routes. My company upgraded the locks and installed additional security cameras. I thought it was over. Then, almost a year later, I was driving through Tennessee. I stopped at a busy truck stop around midnight. I parked near the entrance. There were people everywhere. I felt completely comfortable. I went inside. When I came back, there was a white service truck parked behind mine. Amber light bar. Equipment rack. Faded blue sticker. I stopped walking. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. I looked at the driver's seat. Nobody was there. I called the police. While I waited, I took pictures. The truck had no license plate. An officer arrived and checked it. The vehicle was empty. There were no fingerprints they could use. No paperwork. No registration. Nothing. The officer told me it was probably stolen. Maybe, but there was something on the driver's door. The faded blue sticker wasn't a company logo. It was a number. I recognized it. It was the same number stamped on the key I'd found under my seat. The officer photographed it. Then he opened the service truck. There was nothing inside except tools, no tracking devices, no weapons, no documents, nothing that explained why the vehicle was there. I left the truck stop that night. I drove another 100 miles before stopping. I checked my mirrors constantly. I never saw the service truck again. A few weeks later, the detective from my original case called me. He asked if I'd found another service vehicle. I said yes. He sighed. Then he told me something I'd never heard before. The service truck connected to the people who had been arrested had never been recovered. The one they'd found abandoned was a different vehicle. The original truck was still missing. I asked why he hadn't told me. He said they didn't think it was relevant. Then he said something else. The blue sticker on the original vehicle had been removed before they found the other truck. I asked what the sticker looked like. He described it. It was the same number I had seen. The same number on the key. I don't know whether the vehicle at the truck stop was the same one. I don't know who left it there, and I don't know why the key opened something that the police never found. But I still have that key. I keep it in a drawer at home. Sometimes I think about throwing it away. I never do. Because the last time I saw that service truck, there was one thing I didn't tell the police. Before the officer arrived, I walked around the back of it. There was a small compartment underneath the equipment rack. It was locked. And scratched into the metal beside the lock were 3 words, "Not your truck." I don't know what that means, but I know exactly what it made me think. Maybe the people following me weren't trying to find my truck. Maybe they were trying to find someone else. And for one night, they simply mistook me for him. The first thing I noticed was the road sign. It said the highway was closed ahead. The second thing I noticed was that the sign wasn't supposed to be there. I had driven that stretch of highway enough times to know exactly where the construction zones were. There was supposed to be an exit coming up, followed by a small town where I could stop for fuel. Instead, I saw a portable orange sign sitting on the shoulder. Road closed ahead. Local detour. There were no construction vehicles, no cones, no workers, just the sign. I slowed down and looked for another sign giving directions. There wasn't one. I was hauling a load of electronics from Nevada to a distribution center in Utah, and I was already running behind because of an earlier accident. I didn't want to lose another hour. So I stayed on the highway. About 5 minutes later, I saw another sign. Detour exit here. It pointed toward a narrow 2-lane road. I knew that road. At least, I thought I did. It was an old frontage road that eventually connected back to the highway. I'd used it once before in my pickup. I didn't love the idea of taking a fully loaded tractor-trailer onto it, but the road looked paved and wide enough, so I turned. That's where things started getting strange. The road immediately became narrower. There were no streetlights, no businesses, no houses, just open land and a few scattered trees. I drove for several minutes before realizing there was no traffic behind me. I checked my mirrors. Nothing. I slowed down. Still nothing. Then I saw a pickup parked on the shoulder ahead. It was an older, dark-colored Ford. A man stood beside it. He raised his arm. I assumed he needed help. I pulled over several yards ahead of him. Before I could open my door, he started walking toward my cab. He was probably in his 40s. Baseball cap, work jacket, jeans. He looked completely ordinary. He stopped beside my driver's door. "You taking the detour?" "Yeah." He shook his head. "You shouldn't." I looked back toward the road. "Why?" Roads washed out ahead. I looked at the pavement. It looked fine. "How far?" "Couple miles. Can I get back to the highway?" He pointed behind me. "There's another road about a mile back." I thanked him. He walked back toward his pickup. I started the truck. As I pulled away, I noticed something. His pickup had no license plate. I checked my mirrors. He was already getting back into his vehicle. I drove back toward the highway. About a minute later, I saw another road. There was a small sign, Highway Access. I turned onto it. The road narrowed even more. Then the pavement ended. I stopped. There was a metal gate across the road. Beyond it was a dirt track. I couldn't turn around easily. I had to back the entire rig out. While I was doing that, my phone rang. It was dispatch. They asked where I was. I told them. There was a pause. Then my dispatcher said, "Why are you there? There's a highway closure." "What closure?" I told her about the signs. She checked the state highway system. No closure. I looked through the windshield. "I'm looking at a sign right now." "What does it say?" I told her. She said, "Don't follow any more detour signs." I asked why. She said, "Because nobody issued them." I felt my stomach tighten. I asked her to stay on the phone. I slowly backed out. When I reached the main road again, the dark pickup was gone. I continued toward the highway. I found the original orange sign. It was still there. I stopped beside it. I got out and took a picture. That's when I noticed something. The sign wasn't an official highway sign. It was a homemade construction sign. The reflective lettering had been applied by hand. I called dispatch again. She told me to leave the area immediately. I got back in the truck. Then I saw headlights behind me. The dark pickup. It was following. I started driving. It stayed about 200 yards behind me. I didn't panic. Not yet. I figured maybe the driver lived nearby. Maybe he was going the same direction. Then he turned off. I kept going. A few miles later, I reached the highway. There was no construction. Traffic was moving normally. I felt relieved. I told myself the whole thing had probably been some stupid prank. Then I noticed something in my side mirror. A vehicle was merging onto the highway behind me. Dark pickup. Same one. I called dispatch. They told me to continue to the next major truck stop and not stop anywhere else. I did. The pickup stayed behind me. Eventually, I lost sight of it. I reached the truck stop around midnight. I parked beneath the brightest lights I could find. I went inside. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. I got food. Then I returned to my truck. The pickup wasn't there. I started feeling embarrassed. Maybe I'd overreacted. I climbed into the cab. Before starting the engine, I checked the trailer seal. It was intact. I checked the locks. Everything looked normal. I started the truck. That's when I saw the small piece of paper tucked beneath my windshield wiper. I pulled it off. There were 4 words written on it. "You missed the turn." I stared at it. I hadn't told anyone about the first road. I called the police. An officer arrived about 15 minutes later. I explained everything. He photographed the note. Then he asked me to describe the pickup. I did. He asked if I could identify the driver. I said probably. The officer checked the parking lot cameras. There was no dark pickup. Not entering, not leaving, not parked anywhere. The officer looked at me. "Are you sure it was here?" I saw it. He didn't argue. He told me to stay in the truck while he checked the area. He came back about 20 minutes later. He had found something. There was a small black magnetic device attached beneath my trailer. It wasn't part of my truck. It was a GPS tracker. I felt cold. Someone knew exactly where I was. The officer removed it. He asked me where I'd picked up the load. I told him. He asked whether anyone had been near the trailer. I remembered the warehouse. There had been several workers. The officer said they'd investigate. I asked if I should continue the delivery. He told me to stay there until morning. I slept for maybe 2 hours. At sunrise, another officer arrived. He had information from the highway department. The fake detour signs had been appearing in that area for several weeks. Several drivers had reported being directed onto the same frontage road. One truck driver had been robbed there. Another had been forced to stop after someone placed debris across the road. The police believed someone was using the fake construction signs to isolate commercial vehicles. They suspected organized cargo theft. I asked why nobody had caught them. The officer said the signs were being moved around. The people involved knew the back roads. They would watch for trucks, place signs ahead of them, and wait until the drivers were away from traffic. I asked about the man I'd seen. The officer showed me several photographs. None matched. Then he asked something I hadn't thought about. Did the man know what you were carrying? I remembered his first question. You taking the detour? I said no. The officer nodded. That may be important. I delivered the load later that afternoon. Everything arrived intact. My company installed additional security measures on the trailer. I thought the incident was over. 2 weeks later, I received a call from the detective handling the case. They had arrested 2 people. One was the owner of a small towing company. The other worked at a warehouse near the highway. The warehouse employee had access to shipment information. He had been selling truck routes to the thieves. The detective told me they'd found dozens of photographs in the towing company's office. Pictures of trucks, license plates, cargo descriptions, driver names, rest stops, delivery times. My photograph was there too, but there was something else. They had a photograph of my truck taken before I'd even entered the state. Someone had been tracking my route for days. I asked the detective whether the man on the frontage road had been identified. He said no. The suspects denied knowing him. Then he told me they had found something in one of the suspects' vehicles. An old reflective construction vest, a baseball cap, and a set of homemade road signs. I thought that solved it. It didn't. The detective called again a few days later. He said the GPS tracker found on my trailer wasn't one of the devices recovered from the suspects. That meant someone else had put it there. I asked whether they were still investigating. He said yes. Then he asked me if I had ever stopped at another location before the fake detour. I told him about the first truck stop. He asked what time I'd been there. I told him. He said they had reviewed the cameras. A man had been standing near my trailer while I was inside. He wasn't wearing a uniform. He wasn't driving a truck. He was just watching. The camera angle was too poor to identify him. But the detective said he had walked directly toward my trailer after I went inside. Then he disappeared behind it. When I returned, I hadn't noticed anything. The tracker was probably installed during those few minutes. I changed my routes after that. I became obsessive about checking my truck. I stopped trusting roadside signs. I stopped following detours unless I could confirm them through dispatch. I still drive long haul. You don't forget how to do the job just because someone tried to make you afraid of it. But there's one thing I still think about. A few months after the arrests, I was driving through the same state. I passed the frontage road where the fake detour had been. The homemade signs were gone. The road was blocked by a permanent barrier. I slowed down as I passed. That's when I saw someone standing beside the barrier. A man in a work jacket. Baseball cap. He was too far away for me to see his face. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I kept driving. Then my phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. No number. No name. Just a message. You took the right road this time. I never found out who sent it. The detective told me the suspects' phones had been checked. Neither had sent the message. And the police never identified the man who originally stopped beside my truck. Maybe it was another thief. Maybe someone involved got away. Or maybe it was just a coincidence. I don't know. What I do know is that I never look at a road sign the same way anymore. Because when you're driving a truck alone at night, you assume the signs are there to help you get where you're going. You don't think about the possibility that someone put them there because they already know exactly where you're going. I knew something was wrong with the trailer because the seal had been replaced with one I didn't recognize. I noticed it at a truck stop in eastern Oregon just before I started the final part of my route. The number on the seal matched the paperwork. The problem was that I had personally watched the warehouse employee put the original seal on the trailer. I remembered the number because I'd written it down in my log. This was a different seal. Same number, different metal. I stood there staring at it for a while, trying to convince myself I was making a bigger deal out of nothing. Maybe the warehouse had replaced it. Maybe I'd remembered wrong. I'd been driving for almost 11 hours. Being tired makes you second-guess things, so I took a picture of the seal, got back in the cab, and continued toward my delivery. The load was supposed to go to a storage facility outside a small town called Mercer. It was an overnight run. Nothing special. The paperwork described the cargo as industrial equipment. No hazmat warning. No special handling instructions. The trailer was sealed when I picked it up. My company told me the receiver would be expecting me around 3 in the morning. That was it. About 40 minutes after leaving the truck stop, I heard something hit the inside of the trailer. It wasn't loud, just a dull thump. I looked at the temperature monitor. Everything was normal. I turned the radio down. Another thump. This one harder. I pulled onto the shoulder. For a few seconds, I sat there listening. Nothing. I got out. The highway was empty in both directions. I walked to the rear doors. The seal was still attached. I put my hand against the trailer. Nothing. I knocked once. No response. I felt stupid. I walked back to the cab. As soon as I opened the driver's door, I heard another sound. 3 quick knocks from inside the trailer. I froze. I turned around. The trailer was completely dark. I called dispatch. A supervisor answered. I explained what happened. He asked if the seal was intact. Yes. Then don't open it. I wasn't planning to. He told me to keep driving and call again if I heard anything else. I got back on the highway. For the next hour, there was nothing. Then I heard a voice through the trailer wall. I couldn't make out the words. I almost slammed on the brakes. I turned the radio off. The cab went completely silent. Then I heard it again. A man's voice. Very faint. I couldn't understand what he was saying. I pulled over again. This time, I called the police. I told them I thought someone might be trapped inside my trailer. The dispatcher asked if I'd opened the doors. No. She asked whether the trailer had any exterior damage. No. She asked where I was. I gave her my location. She told me an officer would meet me. I waited beside the highway with the engine running. 20 minutes later, a county deputy arrived. I explained everything. He inspected the trailer. He checked the seal. Then he walked around the entire vehicle. Nothing. He told me to open the rear doors. I reminded him that the seal was intact. He looked at it. Then he looked at me. That's not the seal number on your original bill. I showed him the photograph I'd taken earlier. He stared at the 2 pictures. Same number. Different seals. He asked me where I'd picked up the load. I told him. He called the warehouse. They confirmed that their employee had installed a different seal. The deputy looked confused. Someone replaced it after you left. But nobody touched the trailer. He didn't answer. He cut the seal. Then he opened the doors. The cargo was exactly where it was supposed to be. Rows of large wooden crates. Nothing moving, nothing broken, nothing hidden. The deputy climbed inside. I stayed outside. He walked between the crates with his flashlight. Then he stopped. He found something. A small black backpack. It was lying behind one of the crates. He brought it outside. I told him it wasn't mine. Inside were a bottle of water, a flashlight, 2 energy bars, a jacket, and a phone. The phone was turned off. The deputy asked me if I'd ever seen the backpack. I said no. He asked whether I knew who had loaded the trailer. I gave him the warehouse supervisor's name. The deputy called him. The supervisor said nobody had entered the trailer after it was sealed. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. The deputy turned the phone on. There was one message saved in the Notes app. It said, "Don't let them take me back." No name. No date. Nothing else. The deputy took the phone and backpack. He told me the load was being held until morning. I asked what I was supposed to do. He said I could sleep in my cab. I did. Around 4 in the morning, someone knocked on my driver's window. I opened my eyes. A man was standing outside. I had never seen him before. He was wearing a dark jacket. His face was pale. He looked exhausted. He pointed toward the trailer. "Did you open it?" I sat up. "Who are you? Did you open it?" "Yeah." He looked terrified. "Then they're going to know." I reached for the door handle. He backed away. "Don't. Who are you?" He looked toward the highway. Then he whispered, "I was in there." Before I could ask anything else, headlights appeared in the distance. The man turned around and ran into the darkness. I called the deputy. He arrived a few minutes later. We searched the area. Nobody was there. The deputy checked the trailer again. Nothing. The strange part was that the backpack was gone. The police had taken it. The phone was gone too. I asked the deputy what was happening. He told me to stop asking questions and wait for investigators. Around sunrise, 2 detectives arrived. They questioned me separately. They asked the same thing several times. What did I hear? When did I hear it? Did I open the trailer? Did anyone approach me? Did I recognize the man? I told them everything. One detective finally showed me a photograph. It was a missing persons picture. A young man named Daniel Mercer. He had disappeared 11 months earlier. I stared at the photograph. It was the same man who had knocked on my window. I asked what he had to do with my load. The detective didn't answer. Instead, he asked me something strange. "Do you know where you're delivering this?" I said, "Mercer Storage." He shook his head. "That place closed 6 years ago." I thought he was mistaken. He wasn't. He showed me the address. It was an abandoned industrial site. No active business. No employees. No reason for my company to have a delivery scheduled there. I called dispatch. The supervisor checked the order. He went quiet. Then he told me the customer account had been inactive for almost 7 years. I asked who created the shipment. He didn't know. The detectives took my paperwork. They found something I hadn't noticed. The delivery instructions had been changed after I picked up the load. The original destination was a legitimate warehouse in another state. Someone had replaced it with Mercer Storage. The detective asked me to describe the person who handed me the paperwork. I couldn't. Everything had been done through electronic dispatch. Nobody had handed me anything. The detective looked at the crates. Then he asked me what I was carrying. I told him industrial equipment. He asked who had told me that. I showed him the manifest. He read it. Then he looked at me. The manifest doesn't say industrial equipment. I felt my stomach drop. He turned the paper around. The cargo description simply said, transferred property. That was all. They opened one of the wooden crates. Inside was a second crate. They opened that one. Inside was another. It took them almost an hour to reach the center. There was no equipment, no machinery, no product, just personal belongings. Boxes of them. Clothing, photographs, wallets, phones, keys, driver licenses. Things belonging to dozens of different people. Some were labeled with names. Some weren't. Then one detective found a cardboard box with Daniel Mercer's name written on it. Inside was his backpack. The same backpack the police had supposedly taken earlier. I asked how it got back into the trailer. Nobody answered. The detective opened another box. Inside was a wallet. Then another. Then another. The belongings belonged to missing people. Some had disappeared years ago. Some had never been officially connected. The investigators spent the rest of the day searching the trailer. They found a hidden compartment beneath the floor. Inside was a small notebook. Every page contained names, hundreds of them. Some had dates beside them, some had locations. The last page had my name. Underneath it was the date I'd picked up the trailer. I remember staring at it and thinking there had to be some explanation. Maybe someone had been watching my route. Maybe my name had been added because I was the driver. Then I saw the next line. It said, "Final driver. I quit that company." I stopped driving for almost a year. The police eventually arrested a man connected to the warehouse where I'd picked up the load. He was part of a group that had been using trucking routes to move stolen property connected to missing persons cases. But they never explained Daniel Mercer. His body was never found. Neither was the person who had replaced my trailer seal. The detectives told me the original seal had been removed somewhere between the warehouse and the truck stop. There was no camera footage showing who did it. The only thing they found was a fingerprint on the replacement seal. It didn't belong to anyone they could identify. I still drive now, but I check every seal myself. I photograph it. I write the number down. And if anything looks even slightly different, I stop. Because about 6 months ago, I received an envelope in my house. There was no return address. Inside was a photograph. It showed the trailer I had driven that night. The picture had been taken from behind while I was driving. I could see the rear doors. I could see the replacement seal. And written across the bottom of the photograph were 4 words. "You never finished the delivery." I threw the photograph away. A few days later, I got another one. Same trailer, different road, same message. Except this time, there was something in the reflection of the rear doors. A person standing behind the camera. It was Daniel Mercer. And he was holding the original seal from my trailer. The first time I saw the truck, I thought the driver was lost. The second time, I thought he was messing with me. By the third time, I realized he was following me. I was hauling a refrigerated load through northern Montana during a run that was supposed to take most of the night. It wasn't anything unusual for me. I had done that route plenty of times, and I knew most of the stops along the way. The strange part was that I never actually saw the truck leave. It was a white tractor with a faded red stripe running across the sleeper. No company logo, no trailer markings, just a dirty white cab pulling an empty-looking flatbed trailer. I first noticed it at a truck stop around 11 at night. I had been inside getting coffee when I saw the driver standing beside his truck. He was a tall guy wearing a dark baseball cap and a gray hoodie. He wasn't doing anything suspicious. He was just standing there. I remember looking at him because he was staring at my truck. When I came back outside, he was gone. I didn't think about it. I climbed into my cab and got back on the highway. About 40 minutes later, I saw the same white truck behind me. I knew it was the same one because of the red stripe. It stayed about 100 yards back for several miles. Then it disappeared. I figured he'd taken an exit. I kept driving. About 20 minutes later, I saw him again. This time, he was ahead of me. That didn't make sense. There was only one highway. I hadn't passed him. There weren't enough exits between where I'd last seen him and where I was now for him to get ahead of me without driving much faster than I was. I thought maybe I'd confused it with another truck. Then the driver slowed down. I slowed down too. He pulled onto the shoulder. I passed him. As I went by, I looked over. The driver was staring directly at me. I kept going. A few minutes later, he pulled back onto the highway behind me. I started feeling uncomfortable. I called my friend who drove for the same company. I told him what was happening. He laughed. "Sounds like you found yourself a highway boyfriend." "I'm serious. You want me to call the cops?" "No." I'm probably overthinking it. That was what I told myself. I wasn't overthinking it. I just didn't know that yet. Around midnight, I stopped at a small rest area. There were only 2 other trucks there. I parked beneath a light and stayed in the cab. I watched the highway through my mirrors. 10 minutes passed. Nothing. I started feeling stupid. Then headlights appeared at the entrance. White cab. Red stripe. The truck rolled into the parking lot. It didn't park. It drove slowly past my truck. Then it stopped at the far end of the lot. The driver stayed inside. I watched him through my mirror. After a few minutes, his headlights went off. I decided to leave. As I pulled out, I saw the truck still sitting there. I didn't look back. About 15 miles later, I stopped at a gas station. I needed fuel anyway. While I was standing beside the pump, I noticed the white truck approaching from the highway. I froze. It pulled into the station. I expected the driver to stop. Instead, he drove straight past me. As he passed, the driver leaned toward his window. He was smiling. Then he kept going. I watched his taillights disappear. I called my friend again. This time, I wasn't joking. He told me to call state police if the truck showed up again. I agreed. Then I got back on the road. For the next hour, nothing happened. I started relaxing. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. It said, "You should not stop tonight." I stared at the screen. I didn't reply. I called my friend. He didn't answer. I called dispatch. They answered immediately. I asked if they had given my number to anyone. They said no. I asked if they knew another driver following my route. They said they couldn't see other drivers unless they were part of the company. I told them about the white truck. The dispatcher told me to pull into a public location and call the police. I said I'd do that. Then I noticed something in my mirror. The white truck was behind me. I didn't know where it had come from. It was closer this time. I called 911. The dispatcher asked me for my location. I gave it. Then the white truck moved into the passing lane. I thought he was going to pass me. Instead, he drove beside my cab. I looked over. The driver wasn't looking at me. He was looking straight ahead. Then he raised his hand. He pointed toward my trailer. I looked behind me. There was nothing unusual. The truck pulled ahead. I expected him to disappear. Instead, he slowed down until I was behind him. Then he suddenly left the highway. I continued straight. The police met me at the next rest area. I explained everything. One officer asked me if I had gotten the truck's license plate. I hadn't. He asked me to describe the driver. I did. He took notes. Then he asked something that made me uncomfortable. Did you ever actually see the truck stop somewhere? Yes. Did you see the driver get out? No. Did you see anyone else around it? No. The officer looked at his partner. They checked the highway cameras. There was no white truck. Not at the truck stop. Not at the rest area. Not at the gas station. Not on the highway. They even checked the footage from the station where I had fueled. My truck was there. The white truck wasn't. I told them I knew what I had seen. They didn't argue. They just told me to stay somewhere public until morning. I slept in my cab with the doors locked. At around 4 in the morning, I woke up to a knocking sound. 3 knocks. I sat up. Nothing. Then 3 more. I looked toward the passenger window. Nobody. I checked the driver's side. Nothing. Then I heard the sound again. This time it came from the trailer. 3 knocks. I climbed out of the cab. The parking lot was empty. I walked toward the trailer. I stopped before touching it. 3 more knocks came from inside. I backed away. I called the police. While I was waiting, I heard something scrape against the inside wall. Then, silence. The officers arrived and opened the trailer. There was nothing inside except my refrigerated cargo. Everything was sealed. Nothing had been disturbed. One officer checked the doors. They were still locked. He asked me whether anyone had access to my load. I told him no. Then he noticed something. There was a handprint on the inside of the trailer door. It wasn't there when I left the warehouse. He photographed it. I didn't sleep again. The next morning, I drove to the company yard and had the trailer inspected. They found nothing. The handprint wasn't enough to prove anything. The unknown number never texted again. For several weeks, I thought maybe the whole thing had been some elaborate coincidence. Then my company called me. They asked me about that night. I told them everything. The manager sounded nervous. He asked whether I'd ever opened the rear trailer doors during the trip. I said no. He told me they had reviewed the warehouse cameras. There was something strange. When my trailer was loaded, a man had walked behind it. He wasn't wearing company clothing. He entered the loading area through a side door. He stayed there for less than a minute. Then he left. The camera showed his face. It was the driver from the white truck. I asked how he had gotten inside. Nobody knew. Then the manager sent me a photograph. It was a close-up from the security footage. The man was standing directly behind my trailer. He was looking at the camera, and he was smiling. I quit that route. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. About 3 months later, I was driving through Idaho. Different truck, different company, different route. I stopped at a rest area just before sunrise. I was checking my mirrors when I saw something familiar. A white tractor. Faded red stripe. Parked at the far end of the lot. I stared at it. The cab was empty. I got out and took a picture. When I looked at the phone again, the truck was gone. I checked the photograph. The truck was still there. But there was something in the driver's seat. A person. He was looking directly at the camera. I zoomed in. It was the same man. I never reported that photograph. I don't know why. Maybe because I knew nobody would believe me. But there's one thing I still can't explain. A few weeks after that, I received another text from the same unknown number. It contained a photograph. It was a picture of my truck. Taken from behind. The timestamp showed that it had been taken that morning. The message underneath said, "You keep taking the wrong roads." I changed my number. I changed companies. I stopped driving overnight whenever I could. And I never saw the white truck again, at least not on the road. But last winter, my brother sent me a picture from a highway in Montana. He'd been driving past a rest area and saw a white tractor with a faded red stripe. He thought it looked familiar. He sent me the picture. I didn't tell him what I knew. I just stared at it. Because the truck wasn't parked. It was driving directly behind his car. And in the windshield reflection, I could see the driver. He was looking straight at the camera.